There we go. It's almost like on television. We had to get the crew and all that to do all the magic. Friends, Ethan Fogg, Keneally Chamber of Commerce, excited to have you with us today. We're going to be getting to know and hearing from Jennifer Shoemaker from Underberg and Kessler. We expect that Paul Keneally from that team will be joining us shortly, and they're here to talk about things we need to be mindful of as the phases unfold around us. Primarily as employers, but we may get into other ancillary liability and issues of that nature. Without any further ado, Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm hearing a little bit of an echo, so hopefully that's not projecting on your end. But so Paul actually, in our new age, is participating right now in a Skype court conference, so he should be joining us shortly. So we're in phase 2. It's exciting. I think it happened in a way that we didn't expect. I think most of us expected that we would have a little lead time. We thought that we would hear about it last Friday. The announcement came about, 14 hours later than we expected, and it was immediate. We're in phase 2. And so I think a lot of us as employers have prepared to the extent that we could. Now, how did we do that? We looked at phase 1 and tried to figure out, what we would need to reopen our doors as phase 2. And hopefully most of us were able to get a jump on that. A lot of the requirements for phase 2 are very similar than phase 1, and we'll go through those specifically, as most of them, how they apply to offices, and we'll get to that later in the presentation, but I just want to talk generally about phase 2. So on Friday, during his 1 p.m. press conference, Governor Cuomo announced that phase 2 was beginning, right? And I think I misspoke earlier. We thought it was going to come Thursday, and it would let us know that we could open on Friday, but that didn't happen. And according to the guidance from the governor, so we are now allowed to open phase 2 retail, offices, professional offices, accounting, attorneys, not-for-profits, vehicle sales and leasing, and rental. And those are interesting, and we'll get into those a little bit as far as what you have to do if you're in the market for a car, what you need to do. Retail, rental, repair and cleaning, commercial building management, and hair salons, which I think a lot of us are excited about. And those look very different too. Everything looks so different. And I see Ethan rubbing his head, and he doesn't need a hair salon. And so we're getting there. Everything looks a little bit different. We will get used to it. We are getting used to it. I was saying to some colleagues, it's amazing how quickly we readapt to working in the office as opposed to working remotely. And so those are really good things. Last night, you probably heard that in our region anyways, restaurants with outdoor seating are allowed to begin service today. And, some of that has already happened this morning. Restaurants are getting ready. They've been waiting, as we all have, for the green light. And so, people have been preparing in advance. We also heard that summer day camps will be opening at the end of the month, and June 29th, that's just for day camps. They haven't talked about overnight camps yet, and they haven't given us the specific requirements as far as what those will look like, but we do know that that's coming in some form or fashion. I see that Paul joined us. Morning.
Hey, Jen.
Welcome, Paul.
Morning. Hey, Ethan.
And dentists were also a late add. They were originally in phase 2, then they were not mentioned in phase 2, and then they were mentioned again, but later than the announcement last Friday at 1 o'clock. So lots of activity this week as people are getting up and running. Still closed are malls, unless stores have external entrances that people can come in and out of. Large gatherings, concerts, things like that. Weddings at this point still closed, still prohibited. Gyms and exercise facilities, movies other than drive-ins and amusement parks. Those are all still closed for now, but we are moving along, and it seems to be that we're moving along pretty quickly now. So you'll have access to a slideshow afterwards. I think Ethan will send it out to all of the attendees. And in that slideshow, there's a link for specific guidances for each individual industry that we've listed, and each industry that is part of phase 2. So go ahead and take a look at that link. There's a lot of interesting information there. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. Some of it can be confusing. And the link specifies that every employer has to prepare a safety plan, a business reopening safety plan. And there's a template included at that link. And hopefully everybody had already worked on that before the announcement on Friday. And if you're not in phase 2 and you're getting ready for phase 3, we have a pretty good idea that it's going to be the same or similar safety plan. So get a jump on it. Start thinking about the things that you can do to meet the requirements of those safety plans. And importantly, we don't have to submit that safety plan anywhere. It's for our own internal use. It can be a working document. If you try something out and it doesn't seem like it's doing what it's intended to do, which is to keep people healthy, then tweak it. Feel free to tweak it as we go along. It's not set in stone, but we do have to maintain it, keep it. And if we're ever asked to provide it, then we need to do that. So, and another part of that safety plan is that there is an electronic affirmation that businesses have to submit through that website. It's really simple. It's like a few pages of text. You read it and then you submit, I affirm that my business is complying with all of these requirements. And so it's pretty simple. Make sure you do that because you want to have all of your I's dotted and your T's crossed. And this is only worst case scenario, right? They're likely not going to come in and start auditing all of us to see whether or not we're complying with the requirements of phase 2. But if there's an issue, if there's an illness, if someone complains, and that's a big one, some employees are feeling unsafe, and so they're complaining. And so that's when you might expect somebody to come in and say, let me see your reopening plan. Let me see what you guys have in place. Let me see the masks that you have available for people who don't have them, or for people who are visiting, who didn't bring them, things like that. So these are all kind of worst case scenarios, but it's really important that we have those things ready to go in case we do have a visit or an audit or something like that.
Well, and if I may interject briefly, Jennifer, I think a meaningful component for our audience, it's not only legal compliance. I mean, that's certainly a consideration. Okay. That's why we went to authorities like you, but it's confidence inspiring. Right. When we're trying to encourage consumers to return to as close to normal as possible, it may feel a little weird when your table server has face protection, or when you're seated 6 feet from another table in a restaurant, but there's really two purposes. One is to abide by the guidelines, which really enable us to resume business. But the other is to create a culture where people want to do business with us because we've made the right decisions. So thank you.
Absolutely right. Thank you for addressing that. And I was saying earlier, one of the things that I have found as we've come physically back into the workplace is that people are all over the map as far as their comfortable with returning physically to a business. And so, we have to keep that in mind too. We are putting all of these measures into place because we're required to, but also because we want number one, we value our employees. We want them to be safe and healthy. We value our guests and our visitors, and we want them to be safe and healthy. And then I would even dare to say third on the list is that we want legal compliance with everything. And so I think that's a great point. And you can even think about, as you've been visiting businesses, if you have, during the shutdown, even before phase 1, grocery stores, there are some that you were more comfortable visiting, I would imagine, than others. I know that happened to me. There are some that I felt like they got it. They're doing everything and they're doing it quickly. The markers on the floor, the plexiglass. And then there were some that took a little time to come up to speed. And so that confidence is really important as visitors come back to our businesses. We want them to keep coming back. We don't want them to say, oh, they didn't really do it quite right. And so, we're not going to visit there again anytime soon. As far as phase 2, 6 feet of separation is still the benchmark, with face coverings to be worn if closer. And so, if you're out in a common area, everyone should have a face mask. In the hallways, if you can, and I think Paul will talk about this in more detail, especially with respect to offices, but if you can, have a one-way direction so that everybody, even if it takes longer, you're getting more steps in, right? But that way we're ensuring that people aren't coming face to face as they walk down the hallway. I'm sorry. And face coverings have to be provided by the employer at our expense if our employees don't have one. And it doesn't mean they can't get one, they can't buy one. If they come in and they forgot it, we have to provide it. So we have to have a stash on hand. And so that's another important point, that even if you're not in phase 2, you're phase 3 or you're phase 2.5, the restaurants, you should be starting to get those supplies if you haven't already, because they are hard to come by. And the governor's office has been very black and white on those requirements. And they have said in writing, if you can't get cleaning supplies, if you can't provide face masks, then you can't reopen. And so they're not going to be like, oh, well, you tried and you couldn't, so go right ahead. No, if you can't get it, you can't do it, then you can't reopen. And so it's really important that we're able to provide those things. And so we should be, stockpiling. And I hate to use the word stockpiling, I don't mean that, but we should be purchasing supplies and having them on hand so that if we need them, we can provide them. We should also have additional barriers between employees if we can do that. So there are lots of places that have cubicles. And if they're not those high wall cubicles, then we should be purchasing and providing those plexiglass barriers or separating people so that they're farther than 6 feet apart. And that's not always easy with the amount of people that we have on site. And so we have to maybe do some rearranging and be really creative with our scheduling and how employees work. And again, Paul's going to talk about that as we get, as we get further into the presentation. And also there have to be daily cleaning protocols. Don't just rely on the building management, whoever that is, to clean the offices in your individual company every night. You as an employer, you as employees have to have a daily cleaning protocol that includes disinfecting. You don't have to disinfect every day, but there has to be supplies on hand. There have to be, hand sanitizer available and things like that. And to the extent that you can, let's not share those things with employees, because that's how COVID is, how we know it to spread, is from that, touch contact or, on surfaces. It can, actually I should say we see all different things about how it spreads. And, one of the ways that we think it might spread is through, surfaces that we are all using and sharing. So, so can we refuse entry to people who don't wear face masks? And I'm not talking about employees, because we have to provide those. But if a client or a customer, a visitor comes in and says, I'm not wearing a face mask, just because they don't want to comply, not because they have an ADA issue. And there are legitimate disability issues where people can't breathe when they have face coverings. And so we have to make sure, if that is the case, we can't prohibit them entry. But we got to make sure that, it's not, if somebody just says, I think it's stupid, I'm not going to wear a face mask, as companies and organizations, we can say, then you can't come in. And we're required to make sure that we're protecting our employees and our visitors. So, so that's a way that we can do that. Now, do we have to do it? I don't think we have to. We're not required to prohibit entry, but we certainly can. And that's good business practice to do that. And daily screening is also a requirement. So what does that mean? We don't have to take temperatures of everybody who comes in the door. And I'm talking about specifically employees. We can if we have the ability. And if we are doing that, then there are specific requirements as far as the person who's taking temperatures, right? They have to have a space that's dedicated to taking temperatures. They have to have PPE, they have to have face shields, things like that. So we can do that if we have access to those thermometers, and it's something that we want to do. But we can also just give a questionnaire every day that has 4 or 5 questions that says, you know, do you have a fever? Have you felt sick in the last 24 hours? Have you been exposed to anybody that you know has COVID? And so, you know, we can just do that, but make sure it happens every day and make sure we retain those questionnaire answers. And if you don't have the ability to send those out electronically, then do it by paper, the old-fashioned way. But have people use their own pens when they're doing it. We don't want to share pens and things like that, because then that kind of eliminates the purpose of all of this. If one person gets it, they're sharing a pen with every single other person in your organization, we could potentially have a problem on our hands. Another way, or another requirement rather, is to have a process that will help in contact tracing. So we need to know in log form, everybody who comes onto a business's premises, right? We have to be able to have that. Hopefully we never need it. Hopefully we never have an issue that we have to turn those records over. But we need to know who has come. And we need to have contact information for them, phone numbers, email addresses, so that if the worst happens and we have someone who has exposed other individuals, we are able to provide that information to the CDC or the Department of Health to be able to reach out to those individuals. All of that while maintaining requirements of HIPAA and confidentiality. So, you know, it's fine to have a log list, but don't go broadcasting to your employees, oh, Joe Smith over in, you know, in the business center has it. You know, we have to be mindful of confidentiality. So we're in a really unique area right now, something that I don't think any of us ever predicted or expected. And there are lots of things that, you know, there's an interplay between, you know, confidentiality and making sure that we notify people who have potentially been exposed. So, so keep a log, keep track of everybody who comes in the door. And then I would suggest keeping people to certain confined spaces. And what I mean by that is if you have several copiers in your office, let's have 10 people assigned to a copier so we know that those 10 people, you know, if one of them has, you know, has come down with it, that we can identify who those other 9 individuals are who are a little bit at higher risk. So. So things that, you know, they, as we go forward, will become, you know, more obvious, but, you know, from businesses that haven't been operating, you know, things that we should be thinking about, ways that we can keep people apart. So office-based guidelines, Paul's going to cover those in depth here. A lot of other industry guidances are similar, but not exactly identical. There are some key differences. The guidelines apply to all business activities in offices that are newly opening or that have already been opened. And so as the guidelines continue to come out, if you've been phase 1 because you're a construction company, and there are different, more restrictive guidelines in phase 2, they apply to you too. So, you know, don't think just because you were in phase 1, you're sort of off the hook. And, you know, if you were essential, we still have to comply with all of the latest and greatest that are coming out. And so phase 2 is professional services, nonprofit organizations, technology, administrative support, and higher education administration, but not actual on-campus reopenings. So all of those offices are included in phase 2. And these guidelines also apply to the office portions of other industries. And so I mentioned construction earlier. So construction was phase 1. Offices that are associated with those companies and employers, those are phase 2. And so these guidelines apply to them as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to Paul for the second half, and then we'll take some questions at the end. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ethan.
Excuse me one moment, because it's directly related to something Jennifer said, and I'm afraid we'll miss it if we don't touch it. In my reading about logging visitors, there is specific language around, I want to say perhaps vendors that arrive with PPE or something like that that are exempt. in my mind, I'm imagining like postal carrier, you know, folks whose daily routine, we don't have to log them in every day because they set a parcel on my front desk. Any just quick and dirty guidance around, you know, maybe parcel delivery, mail delivery, utility employees, so the folks on the call don't find themselves spending their entire day logging in people that are exempt?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, so individuals who, again, these people have been operating consistently. Really, we never stopped with our deliveries, our FedEx, our postal deliveries, and they have very stringent requirements on the employer side as far as what they need to do in order to enter a business. Can you log them in? Absolutely. If you're not getting 1,000, you know, deliveries a day, sure, you can, and you could, and you maybe should if it's not, you know, too cumbersome. But do you have to? No. We should just know, you know, who's the delivery service, so that if something happens,
Gotcha.
you know, we can reach out to them. And if something happens on their end and we hear in the news or something that, you know, oh, somebody from FedEx has it, we can go quickly back to our logbook so we know, oh, FedEx did make a delivery on Tuesday, and we can reach out and find out, you know, whether or not that delivery person was the individual affected. So
great. Thank you, Jennifer. Paul, excuse me for cutting in.
You got it, actually, and that's an excellent question, and it goes directly to a point I was going to make, which is, in addition to all of this that's in the laws, mandatory and permissive, that I'm going to talk about in a minute, and Jen just talked about, Ethan, going towards the confidence factor that Ethan's talking about, for all of these things, or even anything not addressed in the recommendations or the rules, if you have one or two practices that you do in your office or your business that's a little different from anything mentioned here, and obviously in addition to being safer, that's going to show anybody who cares, government, God forbid anybody complains, or just the confidence of your employees and customers, that you really thought about it. You didn't just mechanically follow these rules. You thought of something, you saw something and made a rule that was an addition that shows you're taking this whole thing seriously. On the point Ethan was just making, I'll give you our example. It's very simple. As a law firm, so we have a regular UPS guy, FedEx guy, US mail guy or woman, and you know we know who they are. We're on a first name basis with all of them. So now, if they send a sub, I'm going to ask our front desk person to write him or her name down, just because it's easy. It's not that much. So that's that side. The other side is the law firms. We're in a building with 3 or 4 law firms, and there aren't that many in town. There's 10 or 12, and it's the same messengers. I've seen them for 20 years. We got their names. Wasn't hard, wasn't easy. So, but if you're in a different business where you had, you know, dozens of folks dropping stuff off every day, and you had a system where they're 15 feet removed from any person in your company, well, maybe you wouldn't need to have their names, or it might be a different, you know, just make sure you address your unique situation in addition to all this stuff we're giving you. The other thing is on the, you'll see the link in the outline, the website forward.newyork.gov also has a bunch of signs and notices that you can post up. It's very, very helpful. And it actually, several of them kind of go through all the rules. That it's a nice reminder for yourself and your folks. And this is not one of those situations where anybody's hiding the ball, or we're worried about the employees knowing the law. We want everybody to know the law. If some employee comes in with a suggestion, that's good. I say thank you. That's great. We're going to add that to the list. That's another thing no one can complain about because it's a reasonable one. We haven't had it. We've been lucky. Some of your employees are going to make ridiculous, outrageous requests, and you're going to have to say no very politely. I'm not worried about that because you're going to do it with a reason. So I'm going to cover now what are the specifics, the mandatory phase 2 provisions of office-based work. And again, like Jen said, very similar to many of the other industries, but this is the one certainly the most common. And of the ones that Jen already mentioned, I'll go through somewhat quicker than others. So the first one's a very interesting one. So that your occupancy in your office can't be more than 50% of your certificate of occupancy of what the fire department says you can have. Now, in many places, that is a big number. So 50% of that's kind of a lot of people. if 50% of your fire code folks is a crowded office, then go lower. But it actually, they were pretty generous with that because the fire code numbers are pretty good, pretty high. So that's one. 6 foot distance, we've had that to death. Obviously do it. The key thinking about that to your folks is when in doubt, put the mask on. Get used to it, get the habit. We've been open this week, and every once in a while someone's taken a step out of their office without the mask on, and they're catching themselves, and we're catching each other, and already it's going really well. It's just normal. And sometimes you're not sure if you take a left and a right, if you're going to see anybody go into the copier. Well, wear the mask and tell people. And you know, God forbid what happens in the future, you're going to be on record. Everyone in your company is going to know, yeah, he always said wear a mask. Every time, when in doubt, wear a mask. And the covering, like Jen said, folks can have their own covering. They can have a fancy bandana. They can have their homemade thing, whatever. As long as it does the job, you don't have to wear the one we provide. But if they don't have one, we do have to do it. The social distancing markers, yeah, post them where you can. Where if you have a room that's, let's say, a coffee room or a kitchen that's relatively small, pick a number, 1, 2, 3 people maximum at a time in there. Put markers on the ground showing the 6 feet distance between them if you can. The other spot we're hearing a lot of conversation about is the entry in the morning coming into the office, particularly if folks do the health screening there. Don't have a tight little line of 6 people waiting to do the screening, have them apart. And certainly if you can stagger the shifts so everybody's not coming at 9 o'clock, that's very, very good. Even when people are in the office, limit their meetings. So just because we're back in doesn't mean we have to go into a conference room to talk. We can still do Zoom. We can still do conference call. We can do, if it's just 2 of you, if you're lucky enough to have offices, you can have someone stand in the doorway and sit at their desk well more than 6 feet apart and or wear the mask. Make sure, Jen mentioned the shared workstation, so the printer is a great example. If multiple people are going to that printer, have it cleaned during the day multiple times. In a perfect world between every user, that might be difficult depending on your situation. I mentioned the adjusted hours, staggered shifts. That's a great idea. And that's if you hadn't had it before and you now have it, that's going to be a great thing to demonstrate to people that you're really taking this seriously. You're not just opening up and acting the same as before. If there's non-essential common areas that you don't need that tend to be gathering spots, if you have the traditional water cooler from Dagwood Bumstead, either if people are gathering there, get rid of it, or put a sign up, say, get your water and leave. Don't stand there and talk. It's hard. All of us are social people, social beings. It's difficult. In terms of the protective equipment, we talked about the face coverings at no cost. And Jen's right. Now you can get them. Now, not easy for everybody, but if you put your mind to it, you can go find masks and call your chamber, call your Chamber of Commerce, call your county office buildings. People know where it is. Those manufacturers have them. They're out there if you do a little legwork. And Jen's right. If you don't come up with them, and your folks don't have them, you can't open. So you got to do it. And it's not just one little flimsy paper mask, and that's all you're going to get for the next 6 months. If they can be clean, great, or else you have to give multiple, extra. And train the workers on the use of the PPE. If depending on what equipment you're talking about, if you're in an industry that might need a face shield or different kinds of masks, you may have to train them, and you're going to train your employees either through email or Zoom calls on your safety plan. What's unique about our place? What are we doing? And that goes very much to what Ethan said about the confidence too. They have to believe that we're taking this seriously, and we are. And even if we are risking coming off as overly conservative, that's good. Like if your employees are complaining like Keneally is so obsessed with this damn COVID thing, that's good. Jen and I in our other one of our other worlds is sexual harassment training and sexual harassment cases. We have a lot of them. And when there's a joke festering or beginning in our office and we walk by, we're like, no, that doesn't go here. And they look at us like, you know, who are you, prude old people? And I'm like, yeah, right, exactly, because I don't want to get sued. And that doesn't fly anymore. It's not funny. And, you know, this just should be the same thing. This is a very, very important that we have that reputation as employers, as managers, as bosses. And, you know, we're reading all this stuff in the news about the racial situations, you know, little side comment enough to get you fired because it's not funny, it's not right, and don't do it. And we're not going to have it at our place, you know. So Jen mentioned the pens and the staplers and those common items, sharing very difficult yesterday. So Jen and I do a lot of signing documents, letters and briefs and motions, and it's very easy for the assistants. We have phenomenal assistants in our office. They come in with the thing to sign that's finalized and the pen in their hand. Like, get that pen out of here. I gotta take it in your hand. And then and of course, if you do take it, don't give it back. It's yours now, and everybody clean their hands. And in terms of the cleaning, Jen made a great point that don't rely on the landlord without more. Now, there's some landlords that have either a subsidiary or an outside service that provides a whole menu of cleaning. So if you sign up and pay for that, then you know you can rely on it because they're doing a big job for you. But make sure you've researched that and you know what it is and how it's extra and how it's better than before. The law and keep track of that. I'd hate to have in 6 months somebody object to something and we say, yeah, we've been cleaning every night, we've been paying this and this, and there's no record of what the cleaning was, what was cleaned. So make sure we have that. The hand hygiene stations need to be all around the office with the gel to clean your hand. The cleaning at intermittently during the day of the things that many people use and at night must also be disinfecting. So it's not merely like dusting, it's actually a disinfectant to clean it and make sure that's regular. And it's all the areas where people touch. So I'm actually at home today and seeing Jen's office, you know, on top of the cabinets behind her where she's got her, you know, summa cum laude law degrees and etc. No one's going to have their hands up there, so I'm less concerned up there. But the desk in front of her and even the cabinet over her right shoulder there, you know, those are getting it cleaned by our folks.
And I've got here.
There you go.
New things that have come out. This is antibacterial pledge. Who knew, right? But
yeah,
so,
we gave everybody one of those, and everybody a roll of. I could see her roll of paper towels was back there somewhere, and so in addition to the professionals who are doing it every night, we're asking all of our people to do it every day. And then, God forbid, we have a positive test, and that's going to be the key, isn't it? So we're opening up a little bit in many different ways. You know, we got some tennis going on. We've got the outside dining. We've got the offices and this, but nobody thinks we're going to have 0 positives at all of those places. But what do we do if it happens? Are we going to close up again for a month? I don't think so, because we know better now. So we're gonna especially clean and disinfect that area where that person worked. We're going to go to our log and we're going to see everybody that person dealt with and came into contact with. Some small offices, it might be everybody. Maybe everybody's going to get a test. Maybe we're going to close for one day and clean the whole thing. Who knows? Or maybe we can isolate a corner of our office, and those are the only people they dealt with. So we'll see. You know, and then there's a lot of little things here that can go a long way. So our firm, we have, some reason, bad luck to me, 1 million great chefs and cooks, and they love to bring in cakes.
yeah.
And there's some of these people have 6 birthdays, I swear, because there's a birthday cake in there every damn day. You know, we're not doing that anymore. There's no birthday cakes. There's no potlucks. We seem like have a potluck every 2 weeks for some holiday I never heard of. So that's over with. Maybe I'll lose some weight. I'm hoping. But so, yeah, obviously avoid that. We're not having deliveries right now. We're asking folks to bring their lunch. With very few options restaurant-wise for us now. Maybe with the opening that'll change, but that's that. So the next sort of big topic, again, we're on mandatory issues of office reopening. Communication. I talked a little bit about it. You know, everybody should affirm by electronic signature or email or somehow that they've read your safety plan and they know what you're doing in your office. Post the signage I talked about, train everybody. So it can't be just send the safety plan out, some sort of mechanism to show that they've read it, perhaps a call with everyone to go over your plan would be great. You know, establish a plan, make sure they know who they talk to. If they have a concern, if God forbid there's a positive, anything at all. We're anxious to hear their suggestions because there might be a good one in there. Talk to your building manager, your landlord about the list of visitors, and have that continuous log. And the log is so crucial from, again, what we're reading that God forbid there is a positive. If we do a good job with the logs and a good job with the contact tracers that the county and state have hired, we can really manage this and not have a terrible big shutdown going backwards from where we are now. And listen, in terms of HIPAA, Jen and I, we've actually dealt with this for many years. It's not really any different. It's a little more serious, but we've dealt with, you know, giving reasonable accommodations under the ADA, defending ADA lawsuits. You know, we've had private medical information of employees for years and years, and just the same thing. It's kept separate. We don't talk, we don't gossip about it. It doesn't go to anybody who doesn't need to know. Train our employees not to talk about people outside of work. Make sure you post the safety plan where you have all your other posters. Should be, and Jen made a good point that it's a living document. It's going to change as personnel changes, maybe business changes. We think of better things. In terms of the screening, of course, it's huge to have anybody who doesn't feel well stay home, and try to, if we can model that as best we can. If we have an occasion where somebody just doesn't feel great and stays home, and we show that it's totally fine, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's encouraged. And if it's not even anything close to a COVID symptom, let's make that part of our culture. And we have the mandatory screening every day, either by email or in person. That's 4 simple questions about the symptoms, testing, contact with anybody who tested positive, God forbid. I do have a lot of people doing the temperature. Your choice, don't have to. There's a gun, I think it's under $100. You point it right to the forehead and gives the temperature in 2 seconds. I've already had a couple of questions. Again, sometimes when issues pop up, we have to learn a little medicine for a second. So a lot of us out there, their normal temperature is over 100. So now we get an over 100, we're concerned as a symptom, and we got to know from the doctor, Joe runs normal, his high is 102, and then we're okay. On the other hand, some people run low. So if they tell you that, if they run 98 and they get 100, they might be sick, and hopefully they'll know it and say it. So just, it's all about communicating and talking. Jen and I go to the books every day on questions. Nobody has this stuff memorized. And this is all brand new. And even before, just with the ADA, FMLA, workers' comp, paid family, I mean, don't beat yourself up. Your job is to say, it sounds funny, I better figure this out, as opposed to having anything memorized. And that's, that's our bread and butter. Jen and I would rather do 100 5-minute emails or calls a day and keep everybody out of trouble than 3 horrible lawsuits that are crippling to all involved. In terms of whatever screening you do select, make sure you train the screeners and they have protective equipment when they do the screening, if they're going to do the temperature or certainly the COVID testing for some of us. you should have one person in the office who's the point of contact for this issue, who the employees know they can go to, and you know, and have a plan for the God forbid a positive case. In terms of the physical distancing, some other points now that are recommended, not mandatory. So what I've talked about today is all mandatory, but I mean, mandatory to consider the issue and act reasonably. It's not a lot of mandatory. You have to do A, B, C, which is good. But some other things that you should consider as a recommended is reconfigure the workstations. 2 administrative assistants right next to each other, make it this. Can't get rid of them like there, get the plastic barrier in between. Our front reception now has I think she's the safest person in the whole place. It's a huge plastic thing. I couldn't get up there and cough on her even if I tried. I'd have to be an Olympic high jumper. The clean desk policies is the absolute worst part of this entire process for me so far. I used to have a very messy desk. It is now spotless. Jen can verify that.
Never thought I'd see the day.
Yeah, it took forever. Thank God we were closed so long, because it took me many, many weeks. But I'm more organized now, so that's good.
Yeah.
But that's the desk where myself and my assistant and the associates may touch. So the table in the office, the desk have to be cleaned and have to be clean every night. Limit the shared workstations. As possible, even if you're sharing printers, if you can, have one person print and pick up, that's great. As much as you possibly can. Leverage technology. Ask, network, brainstorm on technology that you can use to make office space, more efficient. In terms of cubicles and offices and barriers, etc. If you can have the 6-foot works, you can have the 6-foot markers on the ground showing where the separation is. So if you have a cubicle here and something on the ground that shows, some people, their eyes don't see 6 feet, some see more, see less. And the foot traffic directional, again, not mandatory, but it's a great idea. If you can have your office become a one-way thing, that'd be terrific. Limit the on-site meetings. One thing people have been doing in conference rooms is actually adding furniture so that separates people, so you have less bodies in there because there's more furniture, just to remind people. I mentioned this before, close the non-essential communal areas if you don't need them. Stagger the work schedules. And that's been a tricky one. So my manufacturing clients have done this for a long time, and they have a group of employees who love the second shift or the third shift. I don't know if that's practical for every office, but think about it. Some people might like it. Maybe it'll help with childcare if you have one spouse on the day shift, one night shift. Maybe not. Maybe then they don't get to see each other. So you have to balance it. But if it's something that is possible, it may even add to efficiency. Certainly the manufacturers, they started it to make more widgets, and then this fits in nicely with it. The travel is in the recommended side, so it's not banned right now, but certainly you should limit it. I think we all can agree the planes are, probably a tougher situation for the moment, but we'll see how that goes. And I think clients are, amenable to more Zoom calls and phone calls. They understand. In terms of protective equipment, I mentioned make sure you have a supply, an updated supply. Don't run out. Think ahead. There's a recommended use that there's some kind of furniture that's very hard to clean. So maybe if you can get rid of that and use, plastic or leather furniture that's easily cleaned, that would be preferable if you have the choice. Or maybe as you're turning it over time. There's some discussion, talk to your landlord about the ventilation in your building. Is there some outside air circulated in? If you're in a smaller place, can you open windows? Consider all that. In terms of communication, if you have an internet or an internal communication system, that's always good. If some people have anonymous suggestion boxes or things, whatever is going to get your folks talking is good for all of us. And include the building in that and the signage. Let me see, I'm trying not to repeat the stuff in talking about the screening. Make sure they're not close together when they're getting screened if you're doing it on site. And don't forget to include building management in that. Some people have who are doing the in-person screening, let's say the temperature taking, they're having sort of an initial area to do the quick taking. And then if there's anybody who has a initial high temperature or there's a question, they're having them in a second place so that they don't sort of clog up the line and slow down everything. Perfectly good thought. And again, that's generally for the bigger employers who have lots of folks to handle. I think more for those who are not doing the temperature, they're going towards an online email or internet set of questions that people can do from home or first thing at work before they start working. We have one set up. It's working really nicely. It's very easy. It comes every morning. So that's our, sort of the outline of our points from the statute, from the regulations that the governor has sent out, the Department of Labor. And so I'll look at the first question here. Would you please elaborate on higher ed administration be included in phase 2? So what I take from reading it, and there's a specific section on that forwardnewyork.gov on this, is if you have, let's say, admissions or administration, the deans and the president, those can open. That's a regular office. It should consider all the things we spoke about today. But what is not included is opening up the whole campus, having all the kids back, having all the summer classes, that kind of thing. So to the extent a part of your college is like a office, those can all open. And to the extent of the other parts of a college that are different, those are not open yet. And I would, certainly review the website materials on colleges. And then if there's further, if you have like an in-between you're not sure about, I would definitely send an email to Empire State Development or to the governor's office. And I could tell you Empire State Development is absolutely answering them. And I've had several for unique industries just like this, and including one of them said, we have no idea. And so in a way that's frustrating, but on the other hand, it was fine because then I knew there's no rule about it and I can take a reasonable address to it. So that's the way that is.
I've been appreciating this conversation. Thank you, Jennifer and Paul, in part because when I think of how we as employers are expected to operationalize these guidelines or requirements, or frame them as you will, that we're managing them in two ways at once. We're managing them as responsible employers because we're maintaining a place, but we're also managing them as people. I'm washing my hands, not because it's my job, but because it's just a good neighborly thing to do. And we had a call with some health providers earlier this week. And part of the conversation is it doesn't matter if NASA came in your building and cleaned once a day. There's 23 hours and a little extra time between when the best possible cleaning could have occurred and any number of things could have happened since then. So that's the benefit of personal hygiene in real time and making sure that all of us have something to keep ourselves clean so we don't become a chain of infection. And that's so we can continue to manage that confidence in the people around us, whether they're waiting in line with us for a cup of coffee or whether they're waiting in line to see us at our reception desk or anything like that. I'm reminded of other times in our careers that we've dealt with the flu that was pretty prevalent, or, some of these changes may follow us for some time. I know I've discussed in other rooms that, we still take off our shoes when we get ready to fly on a plane. There's certain things that may be the result of a very specific incident or a specific experience that follow us for a long time. And I'm cautiously optimistic we won't be wearing masks for 20 years, but we may well think differently forever around the way we configure public space, the way we expect employees to interrelate in their work, and the way we engage strangers. I'm inspired, partly because I do have some fiduciary responsibility for, the safety of others. And I'm also literally grateful that we have talent like you in our community, in our chamber, that can help us, whether it be these higher ed specific questions, or really just because many of us are subject matter experts in our own little universe, but very few of us understand the law to the degree that you do. So to have folks in our circle that can help us, I'm not going to say think less about it. I'm not encouraging anybody to set this aside, but maybe to dial down some of the anxiety around it so we can get back to what we do every day. If we do the right thing, get the right things in the right place, use those checklists and guidelines and reports the state has really, I completed them when we began to open up here. I was pleasantly surprised for government-generated documents. They were actually rather user-friendly, easy to complete, easy to digest. So,
and I think that's a good point about the anxiety part. Listen, none of us have to become experts at science or read every little word, but we have seen in the last couple of months, the trend is towards that getting it off a surface is a little harder than we thought originally, than they thought originally. So I think you can share to your folks that all this cleaning is probably pretty good. I mean, it's pretty thorough. It's pretty hard to get it. On the other hand, it's not very hard to get it interpersonally. That is still true, unfortunately. And I think we may start seeing it from the protesters who didn't wear masks. I understand yesterday they had a little spike, unfortunately. So, err on that side. The people thing is tough, even with the masks. So, but the surface thing, if you do this, I think we can feel pretty good about the surface thing now. Who knows? Maybe they'll reverse us in a month and say the surfaces are tougher. But that's been the trend, and I'd encourage everybody to keep reading, but don't get anxious about it.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't see any other questions from the audience. Thank you very much for your time. A reminder to our viewers that today's conversation will be available. It has been recorded. It will be available, as will the companion PowerPoint deck with links and other information that supports today's conversation. CanandaiguaChamber.com or ChamberResilient.com. And again, Jennifer, Paul, thank you very much for your time. Stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Ethan.
Thanks, Ethan.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Be well, everyone.